Welcome to Midlife Customs at Craig's Garage. In this video I show how I installed Ford Explorer disc brakes on my Ford 9-inch rear end. If you like working on cars and watching DIY videos, then you should hit the subscribe button because that is what I post on this channel. Please take a quick minute to read this disclaimer. I am not a professional, nor do I claim to be. The first thing I did was go ahead and disassemble the entire disc brake assembly from the Ford Explorer so that I can go ahead and modify the brackets, and they are different. There's a right hand and there's also a left hand. One of the other things I'd like to point out is that there are several different end caps for Ford 9-inch rear ends, and had I gotten the right ones to fit the Explorer, I would not have to mess with the bolt pattern at all. It would have basically bolted right in. But since I had a different one which has the same center section, but you can see here the bolts don't quite line up, they're slightly off, and if you get the right correct one, you can see it would go together as a direct bolt in. So what I'm gonna have to do, and I checked around on forums and see what others have done, is open up the bolt holes so that the brackets can fit onto my end caps. And you can see here the centerpiece is fit perfect. It's just the bolt pattern that needs to be adjusted. I had the end pucks from the narrowing kit, which worked perfect for aligning the brackets on the end caps and keeping everything nice and straight and flush. And you can see it really sits nice and flush up against the caps. Then I just threw on some clamps to temporarily hold it in place so I can visually inspect it. And when you look at the back side here, you can see that the bolts are pretty far off. I mean, they line up, but they just have to be opened up so that the bigger 1/2-inch bolts can go in. But with the pucks on and everything, you can see how everything sits nice and flush. And you can also see how like two holes would actually line up perfect, and you can drill two other ones, but I didn't like the way that looked, and it was gonna have these oblong holes, and I actually wanted to get the brackets so where they sit nice and straight on top. So I just used the pucks that I had to line up on it, and then I was gonna make a mark on top using the other end caps I had so that I could keep the brackets pretty vertical. And here you can see how it's almost dead center in the little slot on the bracket. So like I said, I just marked that little spot. That way I know that's where I want it, and make my marks on my bracket to open up the holes for the bolts. After that, I just checked to see how they lined up with the retainer holes. Everything looked pretty good and lined up, so I figured it was time to try to drill them out. The first thing I was going to try was to do it on a drill press, but the bit just kept walking, so that didn't work. Then I figured maybe I'd give a step down drill bit a try, and it pretty much did the same thing, so that didn't work. What I finally wound up going with and worked for me was my die grinder and one of the carbide tips. It seemed to do a pretty good job. The one thing it did do though, it threw flakes all over the place. So I wound up having to just put like this little cardboard barrier up to keep all the chips in. And here I show what I was talking about. I mean, it got everywhere. I wound up just using a magnet to get most of it up, but there was a ton of it. But the thing did a really good job. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. But look at all that. So then I finally wanted to do just a quick mock-up with the brackets and put the bolts in and try to see how everything lined up. And it seemed to go together really well. Just used the clamps and pulled out the puck. I even threw in the axle to see how that was going to fit. And actually in a future video I do make a spacer for these bearings that fit behind the retainers. I do have to wind up using different length bolts as well, because with the retainers and then the dust shields, they just are too short. But here's a final look at mock-up, and like I said, I think it just turned out really well. Everything's nice and flush and the brackets are sitting up straight. That's why I made the marks so that everything lines up. You can see here, that's where the line is. So yeah, I was really happy with the way it turned out. So the last thing I had to do was make the same holes for the dust shield or backing plate, whatever you call it, so that it can open up for the bolts to fit through as well. And they go on a particular side, so left and right. So I just got to make sure that I had all my things lined up for the e-brakes and all the big opening for the disc brake calipers. And this is the actual opening that I'm just going to work on a little bit, and I show here how it just kind of fits a little too snug, and I have to be able to take that on and off. So I just used a little piece of sandpaper and kind of went around the opening several times, and I wasn't taking off much. It was just basically kind of taking off almost paint really, but I would just try it several times, trying it back and forth, and finally it just went on, and I was happy with the way it fit. So with that opened up and fitting well now, I put the axle back in and just wanted to put everything back together. And this is what it looked like. I think it turned out awesome. Everything sits super solid and flush, and yeah, I just think it turned out great. On the next video, I shorten my axles and I press in my wheel lug bolts and get everything ready for final assembly on my 9-inch rear axle. If you found this video helpful, please hit subscribe and leave a comment. And as always, thanks for watching.